You are looking at a photograph of my brother, my only brother, whom I adored. Psychiatric diagnosis killed him in 2001. He suffered terribly before his death, and as a result of his death, my extended family and I have suffered all of these years. I want to tell you how psychiatry harmed my brother. I've chosen to remain anonymous because although the video is about my brother and my family, it represents all those who have died and who continue to die as a result of psychiatric diagnosis from the DSM. And this is for all those families. My brother had a very close and loving relationship with our father, who died suddenly in 1984 and whose death my brother had not adequately grieved. When my brother moved back to our childhood area in 2000, where our father had been buried, he sought help with his grief from a psychiatrist who, rather than listen to my brother's core issues surrounding unresolved grief, diagnosed my brother with bipolar disorder mixed with psychosis and, over the next 4 months, with obsessive compulsive disorder, borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia, organic mood disorder, and schizoaffective disorder. Needless to say, I became really concerned. When I asked what explained all of these changes in diagnosis, the psychiatrist told me the illness is getting worse. Because of these various diagnoses involving the medicalizing of my brother's suffering, he was prescribed a series of powerful psychotropic drugs with dangerous effects. He would be put on one such drug that would cause, for instance, serious weight gain, and then he would be put on other drugs to try to control that effect. Similar things happened with the negative effects of these kinds of drugs, including his developing of diabetes, hypothyroidism, and sleep apnea from the horrible weight gain. On a daily basis, my brother was given, for example, Depakote 2,500 milligrams, Dacosate 100 milligrams, Luvox 250 milligrams, Glipizide 20 milligrams, Haldol 8 milligrams, Levothyroid a half a milligram, lithium 900 milligrams, glucophage 1,000 milligrams, and cogentin 6 milligrams. This was every day. These drugs were often raised and or reduced in milligrams and or suddenly discontinued in replacement for new drugs, seemingly in response to side effects. And this caused a cyclical and iterative nature between suffering, harm, and diagnosis. The progress notes described my brother as shaking involuntarily with facial tics, so clearly they knew that the drugs had caused tardive dyskinesia. Moreover, the notes said he was confused, agitated, and incoherent, and he had developed an unexplained fever of at least 103 degrees, for which he was taken to the ER on several occasions. So these drugs are also known to trigger what are then diagnosed as symptoms of psychosis, which, when labeled from the DSM, is considered another mental illness arising from some abnormality within my brother rather than from the drugs. These sets of repetitive circumstances led to the multiple diagnoses in a very quick amount of time. Once diagnosed from the DSM, nearly every new behavior of concern will be explained by the person having a mental disorder. Anytime I asked about all these drugs, the practitioners assigned to my brother's care replied, "His illness is getting worse. He needs these treatments." I had no idea they were destroying my brother's homeostatic balance and physiological responses that govern all bodily functions, including cardiac function. Looking back, I understand that the very fact of his having been diagnosed with these labels, given that they appear in the DSM, which is presented as a scientifically based book, this is what set the stage for interpreting any of his problems as caused by his alleged mental disorder, so that the grief and the drugs that were the real causes of his suffering were ignored. Not one of the labels applied to my brother carries a warning by the current DSM editors to avoid applying them if there are as obvious and powerful explanations for the problems he was experiencing, like my father's death and the psychiatric drugs. My brother was in and out of the emergency room 3 times during the last 6 months of his life, and he had 4 of the 7 so-called criteria for neuroleptic malignant syndrome. I told my family that if we did not get him off these drugs, his heart would explode, because no human body could tolerate that amount of drugs. And that's exactly what happened 6 weeks later, on May 17, 2001. They drugged him with so many psychotropic toxins that his heart could no longer tolerate the chemical bashing. He died from cardiac arrest. My only brother died in restraints in an ER, all alone, with no family by his side, because no family had ever been called, and no family members ever were told about the rapid onset of his symptoms that led to his being taken to yet another ER, and that he had died. We found out by accident more than a day later when we tried to call my brother to say hello at the psychiatric facility where my brother had once again been kept as an inpatient. The coroner, apparently protecting the psychiatrist and the ER staff, convinced the jury at the inquest that the natural causes killed my brother. As a consequence, injustice was served in my dear brother's name because no lawyer wanted to challenge what a coroner wrote. My dear brother was traumatized for years and finally killed by psychiatry. I've been traumatized by psychiatry. My family has been traumatized. There was no way I could let this go, and after a while, I began to take action. I collated thousands of pages from my brother's hospital files, nurses' notes, Medicaid bills, and the like, and I prepared them to bring them to the Federal Bureau of Investigation in 2003. They went through the records with me for 4 hours, and they thanked me for the work I'd done and assured me that they would arrest the psychiatrist, stating that some of the information I provided would be helpful. They said it was not a question of if, but when. Approximately 3 years later, they arrested him, but they only charged him with Medicaid fraud, although 4 more people had died in his care. And that result was simply not good enough for us. Not long after, I finally came across books about diagnosis and drug treatments. At that time, I had no internet access like today. And why didn't the psychiatrist tell me about these kinds of books when I asked repeatedly if they had any further information that I could read? And then I found a book called Beyond Prozac by Dr. Terry Lynch. This book was so powerful to me, I returned to school and I became qualified in psychological research. Today, I'm well versed in the research and critique of psychiatry from a socioeconomic, political, pharmaceutical, and diagnostic perspective. And I know that the biomedical model is too often a death sentence and too underreported. This is because psychiatric diagnosis medicalizes emotions that are not medical, and toxic drug treatments are more likely to be implemented if the person is given a DSM label and, as in my brother's case, causing great harm and suffering, even death. The labels that my brother received should never have been given to him because they're not based on valid scientific research. These labels should have been kept out of the DSM, which is supposed to be scientifically grounded. He was a brother, a son, an uncle who adored his nieces and nephew. He was a nephew, a fiancé, and a friend. He was in his 6th week of his PhD psychology program when he died. He was intelligent, athletically gifted, kind, soft-spoken, spiritual, loving. He made friends really easily and was loved by everybody around him. 11 years later, I still seek justice for my brother. The losses incurred by my brother include his future, the multiple horrific effects of the psychiatric drugs that were prescribed to treat his alleged mental disorders. It includes what he would have contributed to his chosen field of psychology. It includes his life, and the losses and the harm incurred by me, my relationship with my brother, my anguish and my sorrow for my family as I see their continued grief over the loss of my brother. And also my sorrow and anguish that the truth about what set in motion the sequence of harm leading to my brother's death hasn't been answered, and that those responsible for setting it in motion by creating and purveying diagnostic categories and labels that lack scientific foundation and are known to cause harm, they haven't even been held accountable.